the Chinese military is training for an invasion. China's coronavirus diplomacy is backfiring. And Hong Kong is becoming a Chinese police state. This is China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. You know, 2020 just keeps getting better. The PLA, the People's Liberation Army, is planning to hold large-scale landing drills near the Chinese island of Hainan in August. Those drills are a training simulation for an invasion of the Dongsha Islands, which are Taiwanese territory. My favorite Chinese state-run media, the Global Times, has a friendly reminder for Taiwan. They say the Chinese army can turn any exercise into action if Taiwan secessionists insist on secession. You know, those Taiwanese secessionists making the crazy claim that Taiwan does not need secession from China because it's already an independent country. But just because those training exercises aren't until August doesn't mean you can't use them to threaten Taiwan now. Landing exercises aimed at taking over islands have become PLA's regular training subjects. Dongsha, Penghu, and Taiwan are all islands. Nice islands you've got there. It'd be a shame if anyone landed on them using military force. The PLA is also currently conducting military exercises on China's northern coast, which may or may not be a warning to Taiwanese secessionists. Now, you might think, hey, instead of training for an invasion of Taiwan, shouldn't the Chinese Communist Party be more focused on fighting the coronavirus? Or maybe even that Black Death outbreak in Inner Mongolia? But no, the CCP is using the coronavirus pandemic to increase military pressure on Taiwan, according to a new congressional report. That includes holding military exercises near Taiwan last month. In fact, while the rest of the world is trying to help their own citizens not die, the Chinese regime is ramping up the pressure on all its neighbors in the South China Sea. U.S. warships even had to come to Malaysia's aid this week after Chinese pressure. So yeah, 2020 is great. The Chinese Communist Party is also waging a global war against anyone who criticizes the regime. Activists in Canada are being bullied. A student in Australia is facing expulsion for it. Incidentally, the vice-chancellor of that Australian university got a $200,000 bonus for improving the school's relationship with China. And a Polish illustrator is facing death threats for her work on the coronavirus, the Tiananmen Square massacre, and the Hong Kong protests. And the British website she works for wants to fire her for it, unless she deletes this image from her personal website, which she refused to do. Incidents like these make it clear the world isn't suffering from the coronavirus, it's suffering from the CCP virus. Speaking of, look what activists from the anti-totalitarian Chinese Alliance projected onto the Chinese consulate in Los Angeles. Now, I don't know whether whoever did that is a fan of China Uncensored, but I'm definitely a fan of them. I'm also a fan of the U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, Sam Brownback, because he just sent out a tweet that's guaranteed to enrage the Chinese Communist Party. He tweeted, "We strive to uphold the universal tenets of truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance, ideals that are fundamental to the expression of the Falun Gong faith, and we reiterate that no one should be persecuted for their beliefs, including Falun Gong in China." Oh man, I wish I could see former Chinese leader Jiang Zemin's face right now. Yeah, he's definitely upset. But the Chinese Communist Party isn't just threatening Taiwan or its neighbors in the South China Sea or activists worldwide. China also has beef with Australia. Or rather, it doesn't have beef, because China has cut beef imports from Australia. You see what I did there? Yeah. This is big brain time. The reason China is cutting Australian beef imports is because Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison is calling for a global investigation into the origin of the coronavirus, which the Chinese Communist Party does not want, for some reason. But this is a friendly reminder of Beijing's ability to inflict economic pain. But hey, you know who's facing a meat shortage right now? The US. So now, the US is just buying Australia's extra beef. Now that could be some real win-win mutual cooperation without Chinese characteristics. So you may remember that the NBA has had some difficulties in China. Last year, Houston Rockets general manager Daryl Morey tweeted his support for Hong Kong protesters. And suddenly, the NBA's $4 billion China market vanished. But now, the NBA has a new CEO in China, and he needs to make up with Beijing. This is the new boss, Michael Ma. He's a Chinese national. Will that be enough to appease the Chinese Communist Party? No, at least according to the Global Times. Because what the Chinese Communist Party really wants is to be able to get Americans who criticize the party fired inside America. State-run Global Times spells it out. If the NBA wants to win its way back to the Chinese mainland market, it should properly handle Houston Rockets general manager Daryl Morey. Now, if you think there's no way the NBA would do that, remember, the NBA has already censored Americans in America from criticizing the Communist Party. Last year, some NBA fans began showing up to games in free Hong Kong t-shirts, holding banners of support for Hong Kong and Uyghurs. In many cases, those were confiscated, and they were told they'd be kicked out of the game if they kept it up. Like I said, the CCP virus is everywhere. And stay tuned after the break, because the CCP's coronavirus diplomacy seems to be backfiring. Welcome back to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. As the coronavirus outbreak continues around the world, the important thing to remember is that it's been China all along who's leading the battle against the pandemic. Why? What did you think I was going to say? As Chinese state-run media tells us, China has been at the forefront of the global fight against the COVID-19 outbreak, sharing its experiences, expertise, and donating supplies and equipment to countries around the world. Yes, China has been both donating and selling medical supplies and equipment to the rest of the world, and the rest of the world has been extremely grateful. How can you argue with the spontaneous gratitude shown by officials from Fiji and Mexico? The president of Poland was so grateful, he even personally called Chinese leader Xi Jinping. And who could forget what the president of Serbia did? Now that is some enthusiastic gratitude. Yes, the Chinese Communist Party seemed poised to turn the whole, whoops, we covered up a deadly disease outbreak and unleashed a global pandemic that's killing people and destroying economies around the world, to actually, we're the ones who saved everyone by buying the world time with our responsible stance. And we're leading the battle against the pandemic. Yes, the Chinese Communist Party's attempt to claim global leadership using the power of face masks almost worked. And then they went too far. Reports are now coming out about how those donations came with some strings attached. In fact, Beijing demanded praise in exchange for medical supplies. Often, Chinese officials tell counterparts abroad that they must publicly thank China in return for the shipments. Take the case of that phone call from the Polish president. According to the U.S. ambassador to Poland, Poland would not get the medical supplies unless the president made the phone call. So if the Chinese regime was saying, you better thank us if you want these face masks, suddenly this makes a lot more sense. never mind, that's still going way too far. I mean, they can force you to lick their boots, but you don't have to tell them it tastes good. But the Chinese regime isn't just looking for praise for giving other countries face masks. Chinese diplomats have also been pressuring other countries to praise them for their coronavirus response just in general. For example, Chinese diplomats approached German government officials in an attempt to encourage them to make positive statements on how Beijing is handling the coronavirus pandemic. The Chinese consulate even reached out to a Wisconsin state senator asking for praise. Okay, now that's starting to look a little bit desperate. By the way, we interviewed Senator Roth about how the Chinese consulate contacted him, as well as his memorable response. Check it out on our podcast, China Unscripted. So, the Chinese Communist Party isn't the friend who just comes over to help you out when you're in a tough spot. They're the friend who Instagrams a photo of themselves outside your door with flowers, then makes you thank them on camera so they can add you to their story. So how well is China's coronavirus propaganda working? Well, you can definitely see some of those propaganda messages making their way into mainstream media, like the idea that China bought the world time. But there also have been articles calling out China's propaganda, even from unlikely sources. There's also been more and more backlash from other countries, including many countries in Europe, and in the developing world as well. Now, the Chinese Communist Party is pushing their propaganda hard, partly because they, like most authoritarian governments, are control freaks. But they also legitimately fear a global backlash because of the coronavirus pandemic. In fact, an internal report presented to the party leadership shows that global anti-China sentiment is at its highest since the 1989 Tiananmen Square crackdown. Ironically, it seems that the party's own heavy-handed response to that fear is leading to further global backlash. We'll have to see where it goes from here. And coming up after the break, I sit down with the chairman of Hong Kong's Civic Party to talk about how Hong Kong is becoming a police state. Welcome back to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. Ever since the British gave the city of Hong Kong to China in 1997, the Chinese Communist Party has been trying to subvert the freedoms of Hong Kong to make it just another Chinese city. But all along, the people of Hong Kong have resisted. Last year saw massive protests, with people specifically targeting the Chinese Communist Party. But this year, the coronavirus pandemic hit, and everything changed. Joining me today to talk about the current situation in Hong Kong is a former member of the Hong Kong Legislative Council, Alan Leong. He's also the sitting chairman of the Civic Party. Thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure.
So last year, the international media was focused on Hong Kong protests. But with the coronavirus, that focus has shifted. What's changed in Hong Kong since the pandemic?
Public protests have, in a way, reduced in number because of the pandemic and people's concern about its spreading amongst people participating in protests, I suppose. But in the past 2 weekends, people started coming out again to sing "Glory to Hong Kong" and to chant slogans at various different shopping arcades and shopping centers, only to be treated by riot police, not this time round accusing us of riots, but of offending what is known to be prohibition against public gathering of 4 people or more. So it is interesting that they are using this public health special regulation to stop people from exercising our right to sing our song in shopping arcades.
So it's the same tactics, just a different excuse.
Yeah, I think you put it rightly.
Do you think the lack of media focus makes the Chinese Communist Party feel like it can get away with something in Hong Kong?
I think this timing has been picked for exactly the same reason that you suggested. When the world has been fighting the coronavirus pandemic, I think the Chinese Communist Party thinks that they will have no time to spare to follow what is happening on the ground in Hong Kong. And that is exactly why I would suggest that the world, particularly America and other liberal democracies, should not forget about the Hong Kong freedom movement, because what you're seeing on the ground happening in Hong Kong could well happen to you if you do nothing to avert the cause.
There are some pretty big protests coming up in Hong Kong. The June 4th Tiananmen Square massacre anniversary, and also the anniversary of the British handover of Hong Kong. Do you think, how do you think those protest events are going to go with the current coronavirus pandemic situation and with the Chinese Communist Party trying to crack down more on protests?
Well, the chief executive has already indicated that this is not a suitable time to talk about uplifting those plans for social gathering. So I suppose that means our chief executive and administration would still insist on social distancing and use that as an excuse to not granting permission for Hong Kong people to come out in big numbers to commemorate the June 4th in the usual form of the candlelight vigil to take place in Victoria Park. In fact, anniversaries, first anniversaries of very significant events in the anti-extradition movement and in the freedom movement will be coming up very soon. You will recall that the Hong Kong government planned to have the extradition bill sending Hong Kong people back to the mainland for trial passed in our legislature on the 12th of June last year. So come the 12th of June this year, we would be commemorating the first anniversary of a series of very significant events.
So I imagine they're going to try and prevent these protests with the excuse of public health. It's very convenient.
I think so. So they are using the coronavirus pandemic to serve their political agenda.
So it seems like the Chinese Communist Party is working really hard to turn Hong Kong into one country, one system. They've gone after pro-democracy legislators. They have, in one day in April, they arrested 15 pro-democracy activists. Are you concerned at all about your own future?
Well, of course, we are very concerned, but we are not in despair. Not only that 15 of our seasoned political figures in the democratic camp were arrested in high profile on the 18th of April. We also had the Central People's Government Liaison Office in Hong Kong redefining Article 22 of the Basic Law, which is, I see, to be the most crucial article, which provides for the Central People's Government and all its departments not to interfere with matters within Hong Kong's autonomy. But the liaison office director actually said, oh, no, that had been a misunderstanding on the part of Hong Kong for the past 23 years. We, the liaison office in Hong Kong, were not a Central People's Government's department in Hong Kong. We actually are the Central People's Government in Hong Kong, and we can exercise supervisory powers over every aspect of Hong Kong, including how legislators should conduct themselves in the Legislative Council, and also what shops we should patronize. There is a movement in Hong Kong running parallel to the freedom movement, which is what has been known as the Yellow Economic Ring movement, meaning that all of us who supports democracy, freedom, rule of law, human rights, would patronize those shops that share the same ideologies and support the same values. And the liaison office went out of its way to say, oh, this does not sit well with a free market economy, and you are actually using politics to hijack economic activities. So this is very worrying if the Central People's Government, the Chinese Communist Party, they are putting their finger in every pie in Hong Kong. And where is the autonomy promised us, which is supposed to last until 2047?
Well, leave it to a communist official to explain the principles of the free market. Thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
And thank you for watching. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.